Have you ever thought about family court as a kind of black box? A place where these massive, life-changing decisions come out, but how they're actually made on the inside? Well, that's often a total mystery. Today, we're going to crack open that box. We're going to explore a way to actually measure its transparency. Not to go on a witch hunt for corruption, but to simply see how much light is getting in.
This quote really sets the stage. The source material makes a powerful point. The biggest risk in any system isn't what you can see, it's what you can't. When being transparent is just an option, not a requirement, well, that creates the perfect breeding ground for problems to grow in the dark.
So yeah, that's the big question, right? If a system is basically designed to be murky and opaque, where do you even start to understand it? It turns out you can look for specific clues, these little signals that are often hiding in plain sight that show you how the whole machine really operates.
Okay, so let's be clear about something. Family courts absolutely need privacy to protect kids and families. Nobody's arguing with that. But the problem starts when those totally necessary privacy shields get used as opacity shields, basically hiding the fundamental mechanics of how the court itself works.
And what does that opacity actually look like? Well, it tends to show up in 5 key ways. You get decisions that nobody can really explain, professional networks that are completely invisible, money that you can't trace, records that are full of holes, and rules that are enforced, well, whenever they feel like it. These are the telltale signs of a system that just isn't built for accountability.
So, to cut through all that fog, you can ask 3 really simple but powerful questions about any piece of information. First, what data is supposed to exist here? Second, who's in charge of it? And the last and most important question of all, can somebody from the outside actually get their hands on it to check it?
And this part is absolutely crucial. When the answer to that last question, can you audit it, is no, that doesn't automatically prove someone's doing something wrong. But what it is a clear, measurable signal of a system that lacks transparency. And that, all by itself, is a huge risk.
All right, let's really get into it. We're going to break down those faces of opacity we talked about into 5 specific, measurable signals. You can think of these as the keys to unlocking that black box and seeing what's actually happening inside. So here they are, the big 5 we're going to dig into. The paths that cases take through the system, the relationships between the professionals, where the money goes, how complete the official record is, and finally, how consistently the rules are actually enforced.
So signal number 1 is all about the court's invisible machinery. I mean, how does a case get assigned to one particular judge over another? What makes one person's motion get heard tomorrow while someone else's sits there for months? The path a case takes can literally decide the outcome before anyone even makes an argument.
In a system that's transparent, you'd be able to see things like judge assignment logs. So when transparency is low, you see signals like a case suddenly getting reassigned with no explanation. Or maybe one side gets hearings lightning fast, while the other side just gets delay after delay. And a huge red flag is when a court says assignments are random, but then they can't show you any kind of log to actually prove it.
Okay, next up, the network. In family court, judges have the power to appoint outside professionals, people like guardians ad litem or custody evaluators, and they give them an incredible amount of power over families' lives. But the question is, are those jobs being spread around, or do they always seem to go to the same small group of people?
Now just look at this chart, it tells a really powerful story. In a low transparency court, you might see something crazy, like just 5 professionals getting 75 or even 80% of a single judge's appointments. Now compare that to a transparent system, where that work is spread out much more evenly. That kind of concentration doesn't just happen by accident. It's a really strong signal of a closed-off insider network.
All right, time to follow the money. Those court-appointed professionals have to get paid, right? And often, they're paid directly out of a family's own assets. For there to be any accountability, there has to be a clear, traceable path for every single dollar that's requested, approved, and paid out. If you don't have that, the door is wide open for financial abuse.
So what do you look for? Well, transparent data would be things like detailed billing records and public info on payments. The signals of hidden money, on the other hand, are things like super vague billing, thousands of dollars for case management or emails. Or maybe you see fees suddenly spike right after someone dares to question a bill. And one of the biggest red flags is when there's just no way for the public to see how much a provider is being paid in total by the court system each year. This 4th signal is all about the story of the case itself. The official court record, that's the docket, the exhibits, the transcripts, it should be a complete and totally accurate history of what happened. If a neutral person from the outside can't look at that record and understand what happened and why, then real accountability is basically impossible.
I mean, think about something called a ghost exhibit. That's evidence that gets talked about in a hearing, maybe even influences a decision, but somehow it never gets officially filed into the record. That, or things like missing audio from a hearing, or making it super expensive and taking forever to get a transcript, those are all signs that the official story might not be the whole story.
And that brings us to our final signal, enforcement. Look, a court order is only worth the paper it's printed on if it's actually enforced. The big question here is, are the rules and the orders of the court applied equally and consistently to everyone involved? Or is enforcement a little more selective?
And this is such a powerful idea. When one person can violate court orders over and over with no consequences, but another person gets held in contempt for the tiniest misstep, you don't have a rule-based system anymore. What you have is a permission-based system, where it's all about who has permission to break the rules, and that just completely undermines the entire rule of law. Okay, so we've identified all these signals, but knowing about them is one thing. How do you actually use them? Let's move from theory to practice and look at a toolkit you can use to document and measure these transparency failures. This is the Transparency Scorecard. It's a really simple tool designed to turn that vague feeling of something's not right here into a concrete, measurable score. You can literally grade a court on things like access to records or the traceability of money. A 0 means the data's completely unavailable, while a 2 means it's totally public and you can actually audit it.
And using a tool like this is a total game changer. Why? Because it shifts the entire conversation. You go from a subjective complaint like, they're hiding things, which is really easy to dismiss, to objective, documented evidence. It's the difference between just saying something feels wrong and being able to say, here are 14 specific times where required audit data was unavailable. That's powerful.
So what's the solution to all of this? I mean, the goal isn't just to point out problems, it's to actually build a path toward a system that's more transparent for everyone. So let's take a look at what kind of data could, and probably should, be public.
Here are just a few examples of metrics that could bring a ton of sunlight into the system without ever violating a family's privacy. We're talking about publishing aggregate data, big picture stuff, like how many appointments does a specific judge give to each provider, or what's the total amount a provider was paid by the court system last year. This stuff shines a light on how the system works, not on the personal details of any family's life.
And let's just end on this final, really provocative thought. A court that keeps scoring zeros on transparency isn't automatically corrupt. But by choosing to operate in the dark, it makes it structurally impossible for that court to prove its own integrity. And that really makes you wonder, why would any public institution choose to build a system where trust is impossible to verify?